Good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to invite Mother Sarah Minton and Father Justin to come and welcome us and pray over us.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Minton. I am the rector at St. Mary's Episcopal in Green Cove Springs, which is a little suburb of Jacksonville, if y'all don't know where Green Cove Springs is. And I will open us in prayer, and then Justin will welcome everybody. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Oh God, we thank you for your sweet love and your grace and your mercy that you pour out over us. Lord, we thank you for everyone that is here, for caring about our diocese and what's going on. Lord, we ask that you would be in the midst of all that we say and all that we do, Lord. That you would reveal yourself to us in a new and exciting way. And Lord, we just give it all to you, our convention, our churches, and our brothers and sisters in Christ. For it's in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit we pray. Amen.
As Sarah said, my name is Justin. I'm the rector at St. Francis in the Field in Ponte Vedra, Florida, and it is truly a delight to be here. And thank you to St. James for opening your doors for us and allowing us to host this meeting in this region. On behalf of the Standing Committee, we do welcome all of you here in person or online, and those who will watch this potentially later. We are grateful that you're here. We're going to do some fun work. We look forward to seeing you next week at convention. We think that I think, and we think, we're very excited about our time together as we celebrate the camp's 100th anniversary, and then we gather to do the work that God calls us to do, that annual meeting every year. So we're looking forward to that. And thank you for coming here to do this work. And please do not hesitate to ask questions, to converse with us tonight. We are here to serve you. That's what we were called to do. That's what you elected us to do. So Sarah and I are here on behalf of the Standing Committee. Keith and the staff have worked really hard, and Keith's here, and we have so many other representatives that you'll hear from tonight. But again, thank you for being here. And the worst question is the one you don't ask. So don't leave here with any unasked questions. All right, Keith, come on now.
So, okay, beautiful assistant, let's go one more. So the first thing we're going to do is just kind of talk about what we're doing tonight. And the first thing I'm going to do is to walk you through the convention agenda. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the resolutions that will come before convention on Saturday afternoon. We're going to look at the nominations for the elections that will occur Saturday morning. I'll give you a little bit of a financial update and a taste towards the kind of financial information that you're going to be receiving next Saturday, and then we'll say goodnight to one another. So that's kind of what we're doing tonight. Could we go next slide, please? Thank you. On Friday, we really want to encourage everyone to come Friday. There'll be an opening Eucharist at 5 p.m. It'll either be in Mandy's or the Youth Pavilion, depending on the number of registrants. Mandy's can hold a little bit over 225 folks, and if we can everybody get in that beautiful space, we will, and if not, we'll be having an open Eucharist in the YP. We'll go back over to the conference center side of camp for a festive dinner at 6:30 to celebrate, to begin the celebration of Camp Weed's 100th year, and then the 100th year anniversary celebration, which will last the whole year, will kick off. Then, bright and early, and I want to emphasize bright and early, on Saturday morning, we'll have check-in and a continental breakfast at the Youth Pavilion. That opens at 7:15. We're really encouraging folks to get there early so that we don't have a glut of people trying to register between 8:15 and 8:30. The registration will be divided up among the clergy and the lay. There'll be about 6 total stations for everyone to register. So get there early, please. Then we'll have morning worship, morning prayer, and conversation with Bishop Mary Gray Reeves. Y'all may recognize her name as the bishop who's come and worked with us a lot on our internal healing as a diocese, and she's led the convocations and just done a beautiful job. She's a beautiful, peaceful person, wonderful, wonderful soul. Then at the beginning of the day, the business part of the day, we'll do, the introductions, the privileges, all of those kind of things that start us off formally. The standing committee will give a report. We'll do elections. And I want to talk just a minute about elections, because this year, in order to make our time more efficient together, we're working with an electronic voting vendor. That's kind of hard to say, named Paget Communications, based out of Tampa. And we will each, I won't, excuse me, each of the delegates, whether they're priest or lay, clergy or lay, will have an electronic voting piece of equipment. It's very simple to use. I've seen the demonstrations. They're really, really sensible. It's a very intuitive piece of equipment. And all of our voting on that Saturday will be done using that kind of equipment. And it's completely self-contained. You don't have to do anything on your phone. All of the voting is in this one little piece of equipment. We don't require Wi-Fi for it, so we don't have the challenge of, can I get Wi-Fi at Camp Weed? It's really going to be a great improvement. And one of the nicest things about it is we won't have big time delays while we're waiting for the tallying of ballots. We'll have instantaneous voting results, which will make our day go much more crisply. And there will be a couple of training sessions or reminder sessions through the day as we do different voting, so that every time we get ready to vote, the electronic voting vendor, Paget, will come and stand in front of us and remind us how to use our piece of equipment. So that'll be very much an improvement over days past. Then, right before lunch, we're going to have a couple of fun special resolutions. You have to attend to see what they are, but they're good. They're really good. Then we'll break for a nice box lunch. We'll come back. We'll reconvene, call back to order. We'll go through financial data, financial reports. We'll address resolutions. And I'm going to talk more about both of those as we get into the evening a little bit further. Then there'll be some diocesan committee reports. There'll be some closing remarks. We'll pray, and we will say farewell to one another for the day. Could you go ahead, please? And next, I want to just kind of walk you through the resolutions. Jim Salter is here as well, and he served on the Charter and Canons Committee. So I just want to ask that if any of you have questions, please, as Father Justin indicated, we'd love to hear about them, because everything we learn in advance at pre-convention meetings about questions folks have help us do a better job at convention and make our time at convention all the better. So please, if you have a question about any of these QR codes that you'll see as we go through the resolutions should be live. We've had a couple of times where we had a little bit of time lag between putting the slide together and using the slide, and the QR code would expire on us. Actually, would you go ahead to the next slide, please, ma'am? But the thing that I really want to point out to you, and this presentation will be on the diocesan website under the convention webpage, or it is actually right now. And if you want to read any more about the resolutions, as you can see here on this summary page, right at the bottom on the left-hand side, there is a web address where you can pull up all 6 of the resolutions that are in play before convention. Of course, we can have resolutions from the floor as well. But all of the ones that came out of either last year or a committee or a call for resolutions is already there, ready for you to look at. You can also use the QR code there to find all 6 of them, and then as you'll see as we go through these, there's a QR code related to each one of the 6 resolutions. So just in summary, Resolution 1 is brought forward from last year's convention, and I'll talk more about it in a moment. Resolutions 2 through 5 are the results of the Charter and Canons Committee that Jim sat on that I mentioned. They did some beautiful, beautiful work. It was a pleasure to be their scribe and to work with them and watch them work. They really did a great job. And then Resolution 6 came through the call for resolutions process. Every time we have a convention, before the convention, usually about 90 days out, we have a call to the diocese for resolutions on subject matters that the diocese wants to see addressed. And we actually had one this year, and I'll talk about it just a little bit further in a minute. So before we go any further, any questions so far on the resolutions? Great. Next slide, please, ma'am. So the first resolution, as I said, is one that came forward from last year. And what I mean by that is it was adopted at convention last year. But because of what it does, it has to be adopted at two successive conventions. And what it does is it amends our charter that's formally called our Articles of Reincorporation. And it does a number of things, but one of the principal things that it does is to change the quorum requirement, so the meeting quorum requirement for an electing convention from a 2/3 majority to a plain or regular majority. So in other words, it takes the quorum to the same quorum that we require for all other purposes, for all other actions within the diocese. And again, observing, well, both being on that committee last year and observing the committee this year, again, the thinking was to kind of right-size what we do in the Diocese of Florida to what many other dioceses do, and what I believe is true also of General Convention, and that is to require a pure or plain majority for quorum for all purposes. Any questions on that, on Resolution 1? And Jim, you feel free to chime in anytime you want. So let's go to the next slide. Resolution 2 is a resolution that I kind of think of as bringing us as an organization, as an entity, kind of into the 21st century. And it's really kind of the way that we've learned to live in the post-COVID era, and that is it allows us to participate in meetings virtually. So many meetings these days are conducted using electronic technology, and the thought is, by this resolution, that the diocese ought to be able to convene in the same way. Now, if you dig into the resolution, you'll see that there's safeguards about that. It requires that both sides of an electronic participation can see and hear each other. So, for example, if I was a delegate to a convention and I asked to participate by electronic means, the convention has to be able to see and hear me, and I have to be able to see and hear them. Beg pardon? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I have to be able to speak to them, and I have to be able to hear them. Exactly. Thank you, Jim. So that, and then the other thing that it does, again, kind of right-sizing us as an organization, the references in our canons to the documents that are resource documents to us as an entity did not include, interestingly, the Florida statutes. And we're a creature, as a Florida not-for-profit corporation, we are a creature of the Florida statutes. They are the body of law under which we're created. So the committee thought it was a good idea to call them into our canons as a reference document. So that's the other thing that Resolution 2 does. Any questions on Resolution 2? Great. Resolution 3. This was really great to watch as the scribe, watch the committee work through this. Everything that's involved in Resolution 3 is related to Canon 12 of our canons. And Canon 12 is the canon that governs the Finance and Investment Committee. And there was some overlap, almost some inconsistencies, one could say, between it and some other portions of the canons. And the committee really did a beautiful job of digging in, looking at the issues within Canon 12, taking on some issues that the 23 committee had not really taken on about the process for the sale of property, and just doing a beautiful job. I can say that because they just told me what to write. They actually wrote it. They just did a beautiful job of making the canon make sense, make it flow properly, and create a really healthy process for the sale of diocesan property. So it talks about the Finance and Investment Committee's role in that disposition and in diocesan and parish borrowing, which were already subject matters in that canon, but they cleaned some of that up. And they also cleaned up the process for the diocese to sign documents. Believe it or not, that process is now, under their resolution, potentially cleaner and better organized than it was before their work. So any questions about that? Again, the subject matters are really about sale of diocesan property and how that transpires, how it's approved, the role of the Finance and Investment Committee in diocesan and parish borrowing, and the process that the diocese used to sign documents, execute documents. Great. Let's go to the next slide, please, ma'am. Resolution 4 is probably in some ways, although it touches more parts of the canons than maybe any of the other resolutions, it's in many ways the simplest of the resolutions, because what it does is to go through and clarify various language throughout the different pieces of the canons. It presents the language in just again in kind of a cleanup, cleaner language perspective, touches a few places through a few different canons to clean things up and make them more as they should be. Reminds me of our friend Mother Teresa Siegel, the president of the Standing Committee, because her mantra to the Standing Committee and to me and really to the diocese during her wonderful service to us has been right order, put it in right order. And I kind of think of this particular resolution as the right order resolution. So any questions on it? Great. Resolution 5, please, ma'am. Thank you. This is one that, again, much of what the Charter and Canons Committee used as a starting point was the work of last year's Charter and Canons Committee that did not come to the floor at last year's convention. And they kind of picked up those pieces and took them forward and looked at the subject matters of them and did a lot of great work in improving them, quite frankly. This particular resolution kind of does 2 or 3 things, but the key or core things that it does or would do is to define and bring into our canon the concept of cure. Father Wiley Ammons was on the Charter and Canons Committee, and one of the things that he particularly added, I thought, to this conversation, to this focal point, was kind of a look back to the canons as they existed in their last major version change. And that was from about 96 to 97. And it was interesting, as he pointed out to us, we had changed our delegate provision for clergy, but we hadn't done a corresponding change to the quorum provision. So the quorum provision, which actually became an issue last year at convention, used the word cure without a definition. And so in doing the work that the committee did on Resolution 5, they actually decided to bring that back in, to use the definition or start from the definition that the Standing Committee used this year so that we know who has cure for this convention. And they took that definition and tweaked it and worked with it and then grafted it into the provision that would indicate who has the right to vote as a clergy delegate. And they did it at the same time they addressed an issue that became an issue last year, unintentionally, I think. But last year, one of the issues that bubbled up as we went into convention was that inactive or retired clergy pointed out to the body, to us on the committee, but also to the whole convention, that many of them take their ordinal vows to participate in the council of the churches to mean that they should always vote, not that their voting retires when they leave parish life, for example. And so one of the things that the Charter and Canons Committee did this year was to provide a vehicle for that. The goal was to make sure that our voting clergy body was particularly focused on those with cure, those in particularly active ministry and parish, but also to respect those who might be in an active phase or retired phase and felt a call, if you will, to vote. So that process under this resolution would provide those who have cure, and again, there's a definition of cure now, the right to vote without question, but also it provides for those who are canonically resident. So they're from our diocese. They're as Father Wiley said Tuesday night at the cathedral, as we were discussing this with the folks assembled there, the folks who look to our ecclesiastical authority as their governing authority, those folks who might not be in active ministry can register to vote. And it's not a complicated process. It's simply a declaration to the diocese, hey, convention's coming up and I want to vote even though I'm not actively in parish or cure ministry. A question that you might have also heard if you listened to the replay of the tape that we did, unfortunately we weren't able to live stream Tuesday night, a question that came up is, okay, well, what does that registration look like? Well, the registration is pretty much a right. If you're a canonically resident clergy person who's not actively in a cure relationship, you can register to vote, and the ecclesiastical authority, kind of like making the same analysis of good standing, which is a requirement of clergy to vote, can look at you as a registrant and say, sorry, we don't think you should be registering because of some issue in your relationship with the church. One of the examples that was given by the committee, and I think Father Wiley shared this Tuesday night, was let's say there's a parish that effectively asks Mother X or Father Y to hit the trail. And Father X or Mother Y are not, they're not technically under any inhibition, but they've demonstrated by their life and character that maybe they shouldn't be a voting member of convention. So the ecclesiastical authority, if that clergy person registers, even though he or she doesn't have cure, can say, no, I don't think you should be among the voting delegates. The clergy person can appeal that if it's a bishop that says they can't register. So the goal there, so in other words, they would appeal it to the standing committee. And the goal there is that we always want the removal of the right to vote by registration to be a decision of not just one person, but of at least 6 people, and those 6 people are elected. So again, the Charter and Canons Committee did a beautiful job of crafting this, and even though it's complex, it makes a lot of sense. So, in my opinion. So again, all with cure, canonical or non-canonical, all with cure have the right to vote. And what that does is it brings the people, the clergy who are in our diocese, in our parishes and congregations, into the decision-making process. And then those who are homed here, if you will, who respond to our ecclesiastical authority as their connection point to the church, those people, even if they're not in a cure relationship, can also register to vote, and there's a process to take out those who the ecclesiastical authority believes shouldn't be registering, but if the person who's saying that is a bishop, there's an appeal process. And what that does is it keeps there from being a grudge match between Father X or Mother Y and a bishop. So that if, they just don't like each other, Mother Y or Father X and the bishop just don't like each other, that priest has the right to go to the standing committee and appeal and say, I want to register. I want to be a part of these decisions. So I know that's a lot of density, and I really encourage you, if you're a delegate, to spend some time reading this one. It's complex, but again, I salute the Charter and Canons Committee because they really worked over how to make this flow, how to break it down into pieces so that it wasn't all one big fat paragraph. And it has a lot of merit to it, so, in my opinion. So I encourage you, as their scribe, to really read their work on this. You want to add anything, Jim? You good? Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Yes, Father Ken. No, that's exactly right. But Father Ken, you're right. The concern is, as you articulated it, that we identified really in the committee last year identified in its work as we got too close to convention, really almost to deal with it, was that there was a concern among clergy who were not actively in a cure relationship that they were being sidelined, so and not allowed to vote. So that's one of the things that the committee did this year, was to look at a mechanism so that those who feel that it's part of their ordination, part of the vows that they've taken on, part of their call, we want them to have a vehicle to exercise that. Sure. I follow you.
It doesn't matter if you have a parish, it doesn't matter if you're retired, it doesn't matter if some, Mother X and Father Y don't get along. If you're showing up and you haven't lost your standing, if you're not a priest in good standing or a deacon in good standing, and you have both, I think my concern with the way that it's written is that if you want to have
Well, it is that way for anyone with cure.
Right, but when you're retired, the choice is that if you decide to, either by necessity or by decision, to stop coming to meetings and to stop participating, you have removed yourself from those councils. And I think at some point, and that's where the bishop would come in, is the bishop would say, oh, you had surgery, or you were on a mission or something, then you recognize you have a reason to be away. And because at some point, what's to stop bringing in someone who's not well, that doesn't have the mental capacity that's being brought forward for a vote? Not to be conspiratorial, but you can see what I'm saying, right?
Absolutely. Again, one would hope that that's where if the inactive clergy person registered, that's where the work of the ecclesiastical authority would come in to say, no, respectfully, you shouldn't be registered. Jim, you want to add something?
Part of where this came from in our last two conventions trying to elect a bishop, one of the problems we had at that time was trying to get a quorum, because back then, and it continues unless we pass resolution 1 on the 21st, we couldn't get a quorum. And so we had to go out and beg and literally bring people from out of state to try to get to the quorum. Some who had no interest whatsoever in being there, but they agreed in order to allow a quorum. And so what we were trying to figure out is, okay, so we don't have to worry about it. We'll let you worry about it. You're a retired priest, and so you decide, I want to be involved. I don't have cure, and I don't fit within the definition of cure, but I want to be involved. So we've given you a very simple way to do that. And it's to solve that problem that we had, which we could have again. If you even if the quorum is 50%, we can still have a problem. So that's where it came from. And we believe we provided a simple way to do it. And I understand that it appears to be a little complicated. We don't mean for it to be that. And that's where it all started.
And I appreciate that, and I think, frankly, any clear resolution on it is better than no resolution on it at all. So, I mean, and so if we vote on it, but I think there's a lot of and ifs that could be thrown into that. That's my own concern. It could be simple.
And I expect that in convention, there'll be a lot of discussion, just the way you discuss your reading of what we did, or what we proposed.
Yeah, Mother Sarah was pointing out that unfortunately the folks online can't hear us, so these are great comments. I don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable, but if we have further comments, if y'all could come up here, because we don't have a mobile mic, do we? I didn't think so. Please come up here, because the folks online really want to hear your thoughts. So one thing I did want to just give you hopefully a little bit of comfort on, Father Ken, is on the what I'd call self-advantageous elections or selections to register. The committee did a nice job on that as well, because they made the registration point at which a clergy person without cure, a canonically resident clergy person without cure, has to register at 60 days before convention. And that's really a point at which resolutions haven't been passed. Slates of nominees have not been announced. So hopefully that 60-day timeline would help avoid those who are just doing it for self-advantageous or agenda skewed, if you will, reasons. So I think that helps with that issue a little bit, again, because of the way our time processes work in the diocese on when resolutions are published and when nominees are announced. So there would be some, by the virtue of the time that registration would be required, there's some benefit there in that. Everybody good? Anybody else have a comment on Resolution 5? Thank you for this discussion. I'm sorry the folks online couldn't hear y'all better. Let's go on to the next screen, please. Resolution 6, I believe I have a copy of it. I may not. I thought I did. Doesn't look like I do. But again, you can go online and read it. It is the one resolution that was submitted in the call for resolution processes. What it goes to is calling for the scheduling of a diocesan bishop election process. It calls on the standing committee to take certain actions by certain time points. Any questions on that? Again, all of these can be found by referencing the QR codes, or you can go to the website in that web page address that I showed you at the beginning. And this presentation will again also be online on the convention webpage, so that you can go to it and review any portion of this. Because there's a lot of material here. There's a lot of density to all of this information. All right, please, ma'am. Yes, sir. Yeah, the question is, are resolutions subject to amendment from the floor? And yes, they are. All resolutions are. And the resolutions actually can be presented from the floor as well. They have to undergo a slightly different presentation process. They have to be, it's actually a two-step process. The convention has to agree to allow the resolution to be submitted. So for example, if I wanted to submit a resolution, let's say about the lake at Campweed, and naming it for myself, I would have to stand up, get the attention of Mother Teresa's chair of the meeting, and say, Madam Chair, I'd like to submit a resolution. And she would probably inquire of me, Mr. Dahl, what is your resolution subject matter? And I would say, the naming of the lake at Camp Weed. And she would then turn to the body, to the convention delegates, and say, do you approve of Mr. Dahl submitting a resolution on the naming of the lake at Camp Weed, which actually is already named? And the body would then say yes or no by vote as to whether or not they agreed to the submission of the resolution. Then I would actually have to present the resolution, be it resolved that the lake at Camp Weed and Serving Conference Center be named the Keith Dahl Lake. And I would have to have a second, just like any parliamentary procedure process. And then the body would discuss it. I'm sure it would universally be denied. And they would have to then vote on the actual resolution of naming the lake in that way. So that's the only difference about a floor resolution. Amendments are a simpler process because they're an amendment to a resolution that's already in play, if you will. So it's kind of like the body, the convention, has noticed that those are the subject matters that they need to be prepared to address. And therefore, there's no double step, if you will, to submit an amendment. A person, a delegate can simply, or a person with seat and, actually, yes, with seat and voice, actually can stand up and propose an amendment. Can't they, Jim? Do you have to be a delegate? I was trying to decide whether, I know that obviously a delegate can submit an amendment to a resolution, but can a person with just seat and voice, or do they have to have a vote to submit a resolution? As I think about it, they probably have to have the right. Do I beg pardon? Yeah, I think now that I think about it, I think to submit, so just somebody who's there with the privileges of the floor, so to speak, wouldn't be able to submit or second an amendment. But yes, they absolutely can be amended from the floor. Sorry, that was probably a lot more information than you wanted. Any other questions about resolutions? Yeah, we will. Jim was just saying we need to double check that. I think it's actually the rules of order as opposed to the canons. Oh, yes, we have our wonderful Mr. Tim Wynn who keeps us flying straight. He knows it inside out, backwards and forwards. We really started connecting with him over the last week or so. And of course, he's familiar with us from working with us before, but he is Johnny on the spot. He's ready to go, and he's going to keep us flying, again, to use Mother Teresa's term, in right order. So he'll be there and be part of the process. So any other questions on resolutions? All right, boss. Good to see you. Thank you for coming. So moving on to nominations. First thing I'm going to do is give you an overview of the different positions that are up for election. First of all, on the Diocesan Council, actually for the Santa Fe region and for the First Coast West region, there'll be 2 lay positions open for election for the Diocesan Council. And on the clergy side of Diocesan Council, there is an open position for a clergy member, a clergy at large. Next slide, please, ma'am. Then again, by way of overview, on the disciplinary board, there are 2 clergy positions and 1 lay position open for election. On standing committee, there is 1 clergy and 1 lay position each. And then on the Suwannee Board of Trustees, there is 1 lay position open. So let's look at who those folks are. Thank you, ma'am. For Diocesan Council, there are 4 nominees that came in through the nominations committee process, and they really did a great job of reaching out throughout the diocese to all the regions, and they really did a good job of calling on folks and inviting folks and getting us a really great slate all the way across. For Diocesan Council clergy, 3-year term, there are 4 nominees. Father Charlie Erkman from Holy Comfort Crescent City, Father Charlie Holt from St. Mark's Jacksonville, Deacon Annette Sines from St. Peter's Fernandina, and Father Michael Snyder from St. Joseph's Newberry. And we can go to the next slide, and you can see their lovely mugs. And then on to the next slide, please, ma'am. Great, thank you. For the Diocesan Council, on the 2 lay positions, 2 regional lay positions. For First Coast West, Glenn Geiler from St. John's Cathedral and Dorothy Young Holder from St. Philip's Jacksonville are both nominated for the First Coast West region. And then for the Santa Fe region, Melinda Moses from this wonderful parish and Kristen Bryan from Trinity Gainesville. Holy Trinity Gainesville. Sorry, that's a typo. And you can see their faces there as well. Then next slide, please, ma'am. And you can go on one more down. The clergy positions on the disciplinary board, they're nominated the Reverend Joni Cruz from St. Mary's Madison and Father Matt Marino from Trinity Parish, St. Augustine. And we can see them there. And then the next one, for the disciplinary board, for lay term, or the lay position, a 3-year term, Janelle Flynn of St. George Jacksonville and Judy Shipman of Holy Comforter Tallahassee. And there they are. And then for standing committee, for the clergy position, there are 2 nominees, Father Keith Oglesby, who is retired and working in supply work, and Father Bob Goolsby, who is the canon for River Region and is at St. Thomas Palm Coast. And they're their faces. And then on the standing committee lay side, there are 4 nominees. Bob Hood from Holy Communion Hawthorne, John Currington from St. Mark's Palatka, Paul Van Brunt from Christ Church Ponte Vedra Beach, and Gary Bragg from All Saints Jacksonville. And there they are. And then last, but certainly not least, for anybody who loves the domain, the Suwannee Board of Trustees. There are 2 nominees, Cortland Irick from St. Mark's Jacksonville and Pam Jordan Anderson from St. John's Tallahassee. And there they are. Now, similar to Fred's point of a moment ago, certainly nominations may be made from the floor as well. Those are our nominees going into the election. I believe there were several from the floor last year, so that's certainly something we may see again this year. Okay, moving on into the numbers side of the world, I'm going to give you a little bit of a financial update. And you can actually click through to the next slide one more. Thank you. The great news is that we have done a lot of good work this year since last year's convention. We were woefully behind at the time of last year's convention in our audit processes. And we have actually, since convention, completed 2 full annual audits, so that we're now only 2 years behind at this point in time. And as you can see from the slide, we have to complete 22 and 23. 22 is well underway. The diocese side of the audit process is already submitted. We're working, waiting for the auditor's side of the process. But with a lot of support, we have really ramped up our investment in audits and really had some great successes in moving forward towards getting those done. Again, it's really not a good thing, close to inexcusable that we had gotten as far behind as we were. It's understandable with COVID and a lot of other justifications, but still as an entity, and particularly as an entity that should be built on transparency, we were way too far behind. The good news is that by next year's convention, assuming it's around the same time, or certainly by this time next year, we should be completely up to date, including 2024. So basically the goal for the coming year from now till then is to have 3 audits done in that period, and that should be very attainable. Because one thing we're seeing is that as we get closer in time, there's a stronger pattern of clarity. And part of that's because we had some changes in staffing in the office of the controller. Part of that's because we had some changes in accounting approaches at Camp Weed and accounting personnel at Camp Weed. So all of that is part of what really slowed down 2019, 2020, and 2021. But again, we should not have fallen that far behind. Now, the next thing, excuse me, the next thing I want to do is to share with you just a little bit of information about financials. And the reason that we're talking about financials instead of budget is that with a September convention, we're not yet at the point of having a budget to review with you. Both the 23 and 24 budgets are online. I made a mistake actually Tuesday night and thought that the 24 was online when actually it wasn't. It was adopted last December, and I thought that it had been put on in draft, but it turns out I was mistaken, and I was remembering the 23 budget. So you can go online and see both the 23 and 24 budgets. And you can actually see, I'm going to come to some performance information here in a minute, and you can actually see the underlying information that supports some of the performance communication that I'm going to share with you. And I'm also, in case any of you happen to have watched any of the previous pre-convention meetings, I'm also going to point out a couple of places that some information has been clarified. Because when we started this process at St. Thomas about 10 days ago, St. Thomas Palm Coast, we didn't have our ducks in a row enough, and we didn't even by the following Thursday at Holy Comfort Tallahassee. And we've really got the information a lot clearer and a lot better explained. So you're getting the cream of the crop on the improvement process as we've gone along. Next slide, please, ma'am. The first thing I want to share with you is to talk about the diocesan performance, the diocesan financial performance for the whole year of 2023. And you can see there that, how we'd performed in the prior year, which would be 2022, in the far right column. Coming to your left, the next column off of the right shows you what was budgeted for 2023. And then the next column that's captioned actual under year to date shows you what we did, what our performance was, what the real data was for 2023. And I've got a couple, geeky recovering lawyer, I apologize. I've got a couple of footnotes there that of course you can't see from where you're sitting, or if you can, I am very impressed. But this information is on the website. You can pull it up and look at this at greater detail. And even as I was saying, kind of the worksheets, if you will, that support this information are also there. But I want to just walk through those three. Now, we had previously at Holy Comforter reported the revenues a little bit higher, but it turns out, as you can see from footnote 1, when you can actually get where you can read it, that we had inaccurately reported some 22 revenue in 23, and that's been corrected. So the funds that flowed through, and that's really an important understanding, the funds that flowed through the common ministry budget, which don't include, the budget does not include, that budget does not include Camp Weed. So all the other activities of the diocese are supported by what's called the common ministry budget. And the money that flowed through there totaled, as you can see, about $3.76 million. Now, there, as you'll see also in the footnotes, there were some funds that flowed through there that actually didn't go to expensed items. They flowed through the budget, but they went off to things that would not be treated as an expense. For example, this column, excuse me, this column would not be treated as an expense because it's a capital item. It's a capital expenditure to put this column in place. And that's part of why it looks like we finished the year with $618,000 of surplus. We did not. So I want you to walk through this with me. I also pointed out here in footnote 2 on the expense line that we slightly, it wasn't a major correction, we also slightly corrected some expense items for 2023 since the presentation at Holy Comforter. And the net total before we deal with some of the things that flowed through this fund that really don't relate to expense items shows at $618,000. Excuse me. So if you go down to the bottom line that's showing at $618,000, that actually in truth, in actuality, looking at true revenues and expenses, should be about $69,000, $70,000. And the difference is because there were funds that were used for various capital items, like this column, including the wildlife deposit, the chapel roof replacement and window repairs at Gainesville, the repairs of our property at St. Margaret on Fleming Island. Those really should have been, and they were, in fact, capitalized. So they weren't expenses, they were capital items that don't hit expense lines. So that's part of why the real number, the number that really shows our performance, if you will, for 2023 is closer to $70,000, or is right at $70,000. There were also some revenues that we didn't pre-identify. And the one that's, oh, I'm sorry, there's one expense that I also missed that was included there, and that was related to the purchase of the payoff of the bishop's car when he retired. It's the tradition of the diocese typically to gift the retiring bishop with his or her vehicle. That was done with Bishop Howard, went through Finance Committee and Diocesan Council, as I understand it, and part of, again, something that wasn't truly an expense as we normally would deal with expenses included that. Now, the other reason that $618,000 number is higher than what I would consider a true net number is really because we had funds we didn't expect to receive. And certainly the income that we get from the former St. Margaret's property in Fleming Island that I mentioned, we lease out that worship space to another congregation. So we have a tenant there. That part of the excess revenue that drove that number up related to that rent, which really should have gone into the Nehemiah fund that I'll mention in a minute. We also, excuse me, we also, and this shows what the stock market was doing in 2023, we also had $177,000 of unexpected, or unanticipated, I guess I should say instead, of investment income. So the diocese's investments did very well, and some of that income didn't flow directly back to the investments for some reason. It flowed through this budget, through the common ministry budget. And then there were some refunds on some adjustments of insurance policies, and there was some funding of a UF funding campaign that also flowed through the budget when it really probably should not have. Or in a perfect world with capital budget and a operating budget, it would have flowed through the capital budget and instead flowed through the operating budget. And I realize a lot of that is just super dense and a lot of information. I encourage you to ask questions about it. You can email me at the diocesan office. We've got a great, very capable treasurer named Bob White from Church of Our Savior, Jacksonville. He'd be happy to talk to you. Anybody, again, we're all about getting the information out and about being clear and open about what all the information is. But does anybody have any questions about that? Again, knowing it's very dense. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please, ma'am. Also, we thought it was helpful, since we don't have a 25 budget, we're not at the point in the year when we would have a 25 budget to show you. We thought it would also be helpful to show you kind of how the budget has been created and kind of the amounts that the diocese has begun to utilize over the last couple of years. So you can see in 2023, our budget showed about $3.3 million of revenue support. Again, the vast majority of that is parish pledges. That was reduced, anticipating probably, I assume, I wasn't part of the budgeting process last year, but I assume that they took it down a little bit, given the fact that the diocese is without a budget, and that has an economic effect as well as other effects. So you can see the movement down in the anticipated revenue between the 2 years, 23 and 24. And then between 23 and 24, you can also see the reduced expenses that were anticipated between the 2 years. And a lot of that goes to the office of the bishop and other things like that. But the thing that I think is very interesting, and to my mind shows that the diocese is doing a good approach to budgets, is that there's kind of a consistent anticipated surplus between the 2 years. So 23 and 24 are roughly in the same order of magnitude of what anticipated surpluses were for each of those years. Next slide, please, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry, any questions on the budget summary before I go? You want to go back one? Yes, ma'am, thank you. Have any questions on the comparison of the two budgets? Great. Then let's look at what's happened this year so far. Again, there's a lot of great news here. You say, Keith, how's there great news? You're $81,000 in the hole. And because that's what actual would tend to show there. The good news is that we have been under expense, and even with under revenue, we're still only at a $81,000, $82,000 net shortfall so far this year. And one of the most important reasons about that is that we have not drawn out of savings, as I would put it if I was talking in my own family to my own people. I would say this may concern you until you understand that we have not drawn from Nehemiah or the endowment this year, even though those revenues, those support vehicles, were built into the support for this year's budget. So what that tells you is that if we had drawn what we were allowed to draw from those two budget line, or those two support vehicles, we would be very much in the black. Probably, and I'm just going to spitball this, so I'm probably going to get myself in trouble, we would probably be at least $100,000 in the black. So the bottom line that I want y'all to hear and understand and question and look into for yourselves is that the diocese financially is performing very well this year. The standing committee has done a great job of belt tightening where belt tightening need to occur. We've kept staff. We haven't added. We were supposed to add an additional staff position at diocesan office. We didn't. The wonderful, amazing ladies there have covered the open position, and we've targeted a few times where we would have special support, like we had a wonderful recent college graduate who came in and did a lot of the work on our data about the priests of the diocese. One of the things that was obvious from last year's convention was we didn't know our own stable of people well enough. And there was just an incredible amount of data review, file review, data comparison that she and another of our staff worked on really for about the last 6 months. So that's the year-to-date for 2024. Any questions about any of that? Thank you. Okay, the next thing I want to do is to really talk with you a little bit about the sources of support outside the day-to-day income of the diocese, because we particularly wanted to do that this year. The standing committee gave the staff this direction, and we really wanted to communicate so that you know the finances of the diocese, that they're not mysterious, that you know what's out there, what we as a diocese have to draw on for support, what our financial performance is about. And really with this slide, we begin to shift from what our financial performance has been into what our resources are. The diocese, you and I and we have 2 funds that are effectively, we can think of them as the diocesan savings accounts. They're a lot more complicated than that. There's no passbook involved for those of us in my age range who'd understand that. But they are much more well invested, and actually they're performing very well. I did a check on the performance, I think about a month ago, and the annualized performance was on the order of 16%, which is a great performance in those funds. But again, we have two funds. One we refer to as the endowment, and it's primarily comprised of unrestricted historic donations directly to the diocese. So a diocesan person passes away or gives a living gift of money to the diocese, doesn't limit its use, doesn't say, I want this to go towards seminarians, doesn't say, I want it to go to the diocesan office, doesn't limit its use. So primarily those are unrestricted funds in the endowment. There are some restricted funds in the endowment as well that are there for specific purposes. And this endowment primarily does not relate to Camp Weed. There are Camp Weed endowments within it, but it primarily does not relate to Camp Weed. So again, of our 2 savings accounts, think of the endowment as the one that has resulted from gifts to the diocese. Okay? And then the other fund, the Nehemiah Fund, was established roughly around 20-ish years ago, when, maybe even before, but certainly early in the time of Bishop Howard's tenure as our bishop. And what it was created to hold, as opposed to gifts to the diocese, were effectively returns in a way to the diocese. So, for example, if a congregation was closed and its property sold, the funds would go into Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is utilized to kind of plow back in, so to speak. I'm from Gadsden County, that makes sense to me. To kind of plow back in the richness, the resources of the diocese. So property sold, funds go back into Nehemiah. Congregation St. Swithin's by the Swamp, to use one of Bishop Penhaze's analysis or references, needs a new roof. They go out, they have their own wonderful building campaign. They raise 2/3 of the money, but they need the roof, and they don't have all of the funds they need. So they approach standing committee. Standing committee reviews it, makes a decision about how Nehemiah funds might be used to support that parish, that congregation. And probably using that example, what I've seen the standing committee and then the diocesan council do is to look at the skin in the game, if you will, of the congregation as opposed to what is available to support them. So in that instance where they say raised 2/3 of their funds, the standing committee and diocesan council might give them simply a grant. Let's say that their building campaign hasn't been as successful, and they desperately needed the roof, but they had raised maybe 40% of their need. Then what standing committee and diocesan council might do is to say, okay, you need 60% of this. You definitely need this roof. We've looked at your financials and how you're performing as a congregation. You clearly have the ability to pay part of this yourself over time. So what we, standing committee and diocesan council, are going to do is we're going to give you a $25,000 grant and a $35,000 loan. And the loan would be typically at no interest, but what it does is it gifts out some of the funds of Nehemiah to support that congregation and plows 45 of it, that portion, back into Nehemiah as the congregation repays it. So through kind of that, triple source approach that the diocese has often used, there's funds called on from the parish. The parish or congregation has skin in the game. The diocese supports the need, but it doesn't simply grant all of it. It requires some of it to come back in through the continuing work of the local congregation. So that's how Nehemiah is typically used in that way. And hot off the press, because I just got them this afternoon, so you have more current information than any other pre-convention has had. Right now in our endowment, there's $4.2 million. And in the Nehemiah funds collected, there is $3 million, right at $3 million. So between those two, again, thinking of them as our savings accounts as a diocese, between those two funds, we have right at about very close to $4.3 million. I'm sorry, $7.3 million. So does anybody have any questions about the diocesan funds that are effectively our savings account under our entity? Okay, next slide, please, ma'am. Another thing that the standing committee really wants there to be clarity and information about is that there is a friend organization. There's to use a good New Testament term, there's a paraclete organization next to us that supports us as a diocese. It's named now the Episcopal Foundation, Inc., very catchy. And it was initially founded in the early 90s. It was reconstituted about 1996 during Bishop Jeko's tenure, and it had kind of loped along into the early 2000s. Bishop Howard, about 2012, as I understand, reinvigorated the foundation. And he did so with a very specific targeted campaign to raise an amount of money that he identified at the time. And as the foundation chair or president, John Baker, shared with me, it was really the bishop's intention that by the time he retired, those funds would have been used up for the subject matters that he had intended to use them when he reinvigorated the foundation. And just to give you a little bit of an idea about what some of the core of those were. And these aren't the only purposes of the foundation. The foundation's not limited to these purposes, but the purposes of the foundation were to address the education, care, and maintenance of seminarians, the acquisition of real estate for church purposes, and the maintenance, expansion, and improvement of Camp Weed and the Cerveny Conference Center. So those were among the three core missions, the three core target uses of the foundation from 2012 forward when Bishop Howard reinvigorated it. Obviously, since the bishop's retirement, they still exist, and they've spent a lot of time looking at themselves as an entity, because remember, they are a separate organization, and they're doing a lot of good work. They've done a lot of support both of the diocese and of Camp Weed this year. They were major supporters of Camp Weed, and they're also very interested in supporting the diocese in getting our audits straightened out. They were not particularly thrilled, as none of us were. The audits were in the condition they were, and they've supported us financially in getting some of those movings. Because one of the issues was, in fact, that we had put ourselves, maybe unknowingly, we had put ourselves on kind of the slow client approach with the auditors as opposed to the client who wants it done now. And so we've straightened that out, as you can see from the fact that we've gotten 2 audits done this year. But that's just about the Episcopal Foundation. Again, a separate organization that exists for our benefit, was reinvigorated about 2012, and has really kind of those core purposes. Again, John Baker, the president of the foundation, will be speaking to us at convention and talking about the work of the foundation to support the diocese. So any questions about the foundation? Great. Again, this is all in the nature of making sure that information gets in the hands of the people of the diocese and is not the subject of any mystery. So we will see you at convention. Now, before I leave you, there are about 3 things I want to say to you and the people hopefully listening and not asleep yet online, and those are these. You, if you're a delegate, clergy or lay, must register by Sunday night the 15th. Because of electronic voting, we've got to have everybody registered. And the standing committee has given the direction that anyone who's not registered, unfortunately, will not be able to attend unless there is an emergency circumstance. So please, please, please don't make me have to go be the bad guy at the front door. Number 2, please come Friday night and enjoy Camp Weed and celebrate it. But on Saturday morning, please, please, please come early. We'll have a continental breakfast for you at 7:15. You can take your little box breakfast down to the lake and enjoy the beauty of the lake, but you will be registered, and we will start at 8:30. We're calling to order, and we're going at 8:30. So please, please, please be early, not just on time, be early, because there are a lot of our sisters and brothers who will show up at 8:15 or 8:20. And we really love them, but we really would love it if they'd be there more like 8. So with that, if you don't have any questions, I'm done. Thank you for tolerating me so long up here, and thank you for being here tonight. No, ma'am, there's no sign-in tonight. As our brothers and sisters in the Baptist church might sing, I can say that because I'm a Baptist PK, you just have more stars in your crown. Which is a wonderful old hymn, actually.